What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back from our Elder Scrolls Legends, and the final two cards from the Frostspark collection have been revealed, so we're going to spend some time talking about them today, as well as a release date. It is releasing tomorrow, actually, November 1st in the States. I don't know, by the time, they deploy it, it may be November 2nd in some countries. I'm bad with time zones, but November 1st in the States. Let's show the first card off here. This one was revealed by Santos Vela. Sword of the Inferno, a 2-cost item that gives you +2/+0. With the summon effect, the wielder deals 2 damage to itself and another creature. So when I first looked at this card, I was like, alright, so it's a worst scimitar. You damage yourself in exchange for a firebolt. Seems pretty bad, although self-damage warrior may like it. That was my first impression. I'll show you some cards that I was thinking about. We'll move that off screen. So I was thinking about Fighters Guild Hall. You'd give yourself damage, so this sword would give you +4 due to Fighters Guild Hall. I was thinking of Fetchifly Golem and Fearless Northlander. Fearless Northlander would get +4. This guy summons an instant Fetchifly Swarm. So these guys all have synergy, in that self-damage warrior archetype that never really fully got going. I like it because it makes Frost Troll a 5/4 for 4, or a 5/4 for 6. So that's pretty decent. Brasilisk, it'll kill itself, so it's not really a thing. As well as I like it for Gristlehide Dreg for being some guaranteed card draw. So that was where I was thinking off the bat, was self-damage warrior, and, depending on what kind of deck you are, if you're a deck that doesn't have a ton of removal, let's say you're running like a warrior deck, maybe not necessarily self-damage, but there's not a ton of pings in those colors. There's not a ton of early game removal. Most decks like that have no answer besides guards to a skulk. Now you have the ability to essentially remove the skulk on turn 2, so you can match your green opponent and not let the skulk get out of control. But that's just thinking about that card on a surface level. But there's a lot more to the card. So simple things like lethal. So if you equip it to a Fighters Guild recruit, I assume the summon effect would happen in tandem. So like equipping this to Fighters Guild recruit would mean Fighters Guild recruit would kill himself due to the lethal damage. But you also could use that lethal damage to ping something else, kind of like a Quicksilver crossbow, but cheaper. Obviously, you're not going to want to kill your own lethal creatures all the time, but if you have no other option, this can act like a Cruel Fire Bloom type of thing, but better. So lethal creatures are going to be pretty good with this. But the thing that took me a little while to sink in, and my Slay Archer is going to love this, this card can trigger Slay effects. So equipping this on a Child Foreseen means you can trigger that effect right away. But even more so than that, if you put this on a Morag Tong Aspirant, it'll kill itself, which will trigger its own Slay effect, I believe. This needs to be confirmed, but I'm almost 100% positive that would be the case. As well as in turn 1 or 2, you're going to probably take something else out as well. So you can turn Sword of the Inferno into 2 Morag Tong Aspirants. Skoomer Underboss actually gets good as well. Just all these Slay cards. I saw somebody mention Cicero. You can finally get some guaranteed value. But even something like if you can weaken your Falkreath Defiler by 1 damage, you can use it to trigger himself. So Sword of the Inferno has a lot of really interesting applications, I think, in a Slay deck. Obviously, Slay Archer is going to have to be the thing, but it's at least something that you have to consider. Or some kind of Slay Halalu type thing could also do this as well. Also, if you're... Not that you'd be able to pull this off, but let's say you have a Drain creature. Drain creatures would be able to damage themselves, so something like Brynjolf could damage himself for 2, so he'd heal for 2, as well as damage an opponent's creature for 2, so you'd heal for 4, as well as buff Brynjolf for when he gets to swing, also getting you 3 magicka back in the process, assuming he doesn't have summoning sickness. So there's a lot of interesting applications with Drain as well, and the last thing that I was thinking of, or not initially thinking of, but took a little time to think of, not necessarily normal pilfer cards, but something like Sails Through Storm. You have yet another card that can pilfer with Skooma Underboss. Same thing with Kinral Burglar. If you have Night Mother or small tokens out there as well, it works out. And comboing with Crusader's Assault can draw you a bajillion cards. So this card, I think, is... If you just look at it on surface level, you think, there's probably some nifty combos, but that's about it. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper, this card has a lot of potential. And I think we're going to see it quite a bit, if for nothing else other than it'll let card or decks that didn't previously have a ton of pings have some answers to some of the more common early game threats. So I think we will see this card a fair amount, and I think the card is, I don't want to say underrated because it was just revealed, but it's one of those cards where if you only think about it with your initial gut reaction, you don't really get a chance to realize how flexible and how good the card could be. And I'll admit that I'm kind of glad that I took an extra day to make this video, because I think my opinion, if I did this a few hours after the card was revealed versus giving myself time to reflect a little bit, read what some other people were saying, talk to some people about it, I think my opinion would have been quite different. And the next card we're going to talk about is the legendary from the set. It is also the only neutral in the set. Here it is right here, Wild Incarnate. It's a 7-cost 5/6 with guard. It's a beast with the summon effect. Draw a card if you have 4 runes, and draw an additional card if you have 5 runes. So this card does have beast synergy. It could fit into like Animal Monk, which doesn't have a ton of draw as it is, besides, generating animals with something like Elder Gleam Matron. But now Wild's Incarnate can finally help you draw some cards in that deck, as well as gives you kind of an anti-aggro answer, but at turn 7, that's not really where you want to be anyway. It does combo with Shadow Green Elder to become a 7/8 guard. Wild's Incarnate, I think, is the type of card that feels really good for playing against a traditional control opponent, where they kind of just sit there for 37 turns and don't ever hit face because it is the more correct play. And I've talked about wanting cards in the game that can punish your opponent for not attacking you, even though they have the ability to do so. Wild's Incarnate is kind of the first card that really allows you to punish your opponent for sitting there. Now, is 1 or 2 cards that big of a deal? Probably not. And I think that the decks that would care the most out of gaining those 1 or 2 cards probably don't want to run this card. So if you're thinking about like an aggro deck, you're probably not running Wild's Incarnate, although maybe it'll help in a mirror, but a lot of aggro decks are breaking their own runes or just taking a ton of damage anyway. So I don't think you necessarily run this there. Maybe something like a mid-range Spell Sword deck can justify running this, since you don't have a ton of card draw anyway. Wild's Incarnate can allow you to potentially draw some cards. But other than that, most other mid-range decks, like it's technically more aggro warrior than mid-warrior, or mid-sorcerer, I don't think are necessarily going to run Wild's Incarnate. Although maybe once in a while, this will draw you an extra card or 2 that will get you to that lethal that you otherwise might not have gotten to before your opponent stabilized. But like I said, I just don't think those decks are really running this card. So my overall opinion on the card so far is I think it's a good card, and I think it's a mechanic or a interaction that I wanted to see introduced to the game as far as punishing your opponent for not attacking you. I just don't think the card really fits into any particular deck at the moment. Although if you're running like a mono neutral deck, this card definitely fits in well in terms of giving you a anti-aggro card to play, as well as giving you some more draw, because most neutral draw sucks. This card doesn't suck, but it has a somewhat difficult effect to reliably trigger, since that effect is, I don't want to say completely out of your hands, but somewhat out of your hands. But it's at least a pretty good card for neutral decks, as well as if you ever get to the whole singleton world, and if it ever becomes more of a thing, I think this card is pretty good for singleton decks, because Mordecai does heal you as well as restore a rune. So if you're at 3 runes, Mordecai can heal you to the point where Wild's Incarnate can draw you 1 card, or if you had 1 rune broken, obviously Mordecai bumps you to 5. So this card is also a pretty good card for those singleton archetypes that never really kind of fully got going, but I think we're almost getting to the range where a 2-card singleton deck could be, I don't want to say viable, but on the cusp of viable. Wild's Incarnate can do, cards like Wild's Incarnate, I should say, do a solid amount for pushing that singleton archetype into almost viability. This kind of helps solve the consistency issues of singleton decks, since you lose out on a lot of draw. So you could put Wilds Incarnate into like a, I don't know, Singleton Crusader or something like that, and maybe start working your way into being a thing. I don't know, it's a card that I definitely want to mess around with. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the 2 final cards that are revealed. Tomorrow, I'm going to make a rankings list of the 11 cards revealed. I'm going to rank them from 11 to 1 in terms of what I feel their power levels are going to be, as far as playability, overall power levels. Just so that I can get my thoughts out into the world early enough to where you guys can call me on my bullshit if I wind up horribly wrong in the end, or I can look back on this in 6 months and be like, haha, I told you guys I'm brilliant. I know everything about cards. I'm just kidding, I don't do that. But I think it'll be fun to look back on, as well as kind of look at the set as a whole now that all 11 cards have been revealed. And they're coming out tomorrow, so tomorrow will be a good time to kind of look at them as we're getting ready to play with the cards tomorrow on stream. But that is going to be it for now, guys. As always, thank you all very, very much for watching. I'm DragonTamerBlayde, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.